audio before. Audio test, magari tagliatelle, test 1, test 2, test 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Hi everyone, we are going to begin my next talk from George Dubus about pyramids. Please turn off your cell phones and enjoy.
Okay, so hi everyone, I'm George. Before we start, a quick question. Who among you has ever tried or used Pyramid? Okay, great. Just a quick introduction for the others. These are the keywords that I used to describe Pyramid on the introduction in the documentation. There are some basic and common stuff. They focus on documentation and reliability, which means if you try to commit something that is not test covered and documentation covered, they won't accept it. It's open source. They focus on the speed of the implementation, trying not to be too slow for a web application. But the more unique parts are the simplicity and the minimalism. So simplicity means that they try to make it so that you don't have to learn concepts that you don't use. For example, there are two ways to map URLs to code in Pyramid, but you can only know about one, and you can only know about one and use one for months, and that's not a problem. And the whole framework is like that. There's a lot of tools, but you don't have to use them if you don't want, and they won't. You won't need to learn them. It's minimalistic because, unlike Django, it does not provide everything you need to make a web application. It only focuses on the core of the web application. The core being mapping the URLs to code, templating, security, and serving.
Sorry, can you put your computer near the microphone?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Is this better?
Yep.
Okay. Mapping URLs to code, templating, security, and saving static assets. And it doesn't do the SQL, it doesn't do NORM, it doesn't do forms. There are other libraries that you can plug in Pyramid on the top of Pyramid to do that. This enables you to choose which library you would like to do with that. With Django, you have to use the Django ORM, you have to do SQL, and if you don't do that, you lose some part of Django, you lose the admin. So that's what Pyramid is. Much smaller, but still have the potential to grow with extensions. So why am I here? I write some web application with Pyramid, and one thing I have to do again and again is authentication. And authentication is boring because it's really hard to do right, and it's always the same thing. And then I discovered Persona, which is an authentication system written by Mozilla. It has a lot of technical qualities in the implementation itself, but moreover, it's really easy to use. It's just about adding a few JavaScript lines to your application and implementing a few stuff on the server side. So I implemented it in a few on my apps, and then I decided, hey, I'm copy-pasting this from app to app. Shouldn't I be able to make this in a more reusable way? So I put it in a library, and I released the library because it was there. I just added the documentation. And during that, I discovered how to make libraries with Pyramid, and I discovered the libraries and extension system is really well done. So that's mostly what I'm going to talk about today. There will be two main parts. First, I will explain the extensible configuration system so you have an idea of what we are dealing with. Then I'm going to give you examples of what can be done with it, both to make libraries and to write nicely organized applications. So here is an Hello World example with Pyramid. We have on the top a view, which is just a function that takes a request and return a response. And here is the configuration part. We have 3 lines to configure the application itself and 3 lines to create a WSGI application and pass it to a server. So the part that is going to interest us the most today is this one, the configuration. So here is the configurator object. It's the center of every Pyramid application. It's what is used to bring all the little bits together. Here for the hello world, we have two concepts, we call two methods. We add a root, which is just more or less an URL, and we attach a view to this root, the view being the code we have written earlier. And there's a lot of these methods which are called directives in Pyramid that enable you to add and configure a lot of stuff in your application. They configure views, authentication, renderers, template renderers, sessions, and everything that can be done in Pyramid. So, sorry. One interesting thing is that we can move the directives around. The order is not significant because calling a directive doesn't do anything right now. It only does something when the configuration is committed, and that happens when we make with the application. So we can add directives in any order, and they're added to some list that is processed later, and that's going to be important. Another nice thing is that, like in Flask, for example, we can decorate views with some decorator to add them. But unlike Flask, it's not decorator with import time side effect. In Flask, you add a decorator, and when the module is imported, the view is added to some list or some register. Here, it's not the case. The only thing this decorator does is marking the view with some in fact, it's a callback that is called later. It's called when I do a config.scan. When I call this config.scan, the callback here will be called, and the view will be added to the configuration. And that's a nice property because we don't have to count on import time effects, which can be troublesome in some situations. So this configurator has a few nice things. It has sanity checks. When I define a view, I have to attach it to a root. If that root doesn't exist, it doesn't make sense. The application can't work, and the configurator will tell me with a very precise error message. On this line, there is no root name like this. But, sorry, even more importantly, there are conflict detection. If I try to add two views to the exact same root, the configurator will raise a conflict because there's no way to know which one to use, and that's pretty interesting. It means that Pyramid won't silently discard one. Errors shouldn't be passed silently, so there is an explicit conflict and the application won't start. I'll come back on the conflicts a little later. Another nice thing and pretty important with the configurator is that I can include I can include configuration that is somewhere else. Basically, I have a callable, a function that takes a config argument, and I can call include on this function. The function itself only calls other directives on this config. From there, it looks like just a simple function call, but it's not. There are some nice things that can be done. For example, I can add a root prefix argument to this include. And this root prefix argument make it so that any root defined in more configuration functions will be prefixed with this prefix. Which means I can take some library or some code from someone else and import it as a subpass in my application so that it doesn't conflict with my own my own roots. I can also use it to make different parts of my application in different modules and import them all in different subpaths of my application. So the most important part the most useful part of this include is the way it handles conflict. I told you if I have two conflicting directives, Pyramid will tell me. But if I have a conflicting directive in an included function and in a top level, Pyramid will assume I want the top level directive to override the included directive. This means that I can include some library and replace some parts just by calling the directives again. It also provides me with a way to solve my self-conflict between libraries. If I include two functions, two callers that are conflicting, here Pyramid doesn't know how to solve this conflict because there are two libraries. It doesn't know which one I want. So I can simply call this directive, and this one will override the two others and solve the conflict. So libraries might be conflicting, but I have a way to solve it in my code. Last part of the configuration goodness, of the include goodness, is the include me convention. So I can call include on a callable, a function. But I can also call include on a dotted path, just a path. And if I call include on the path of a module or on a module, Pyramid will look for a function that is called include me in it. This means that I can include any Python module, any Python package without knowing what's in it because I know that the writer will have put an include me function in it. I don't have to worry what's inside this module. So this means that Pyramid extension is just any Python package that has an include me function. Because an include me function can call anything on a config, an extension can do everything that is possible in Pyramid. And because the top level directives are override the included directives, this means that extension can set any defaults they want, and they can be overridden in my application. An example of that, code from my Pyramid personal library. I define an authentication and an authorization policy so that the user can just include Pyramid persona and use it right away with these default authentication and authorization policies. But if the user wants to use another authentication policy or change some ads, all he has to do is include the library and just call the same directive with another value, and this will override the default I set in the library. So that's nice. That also means that when I'm a library writer, I don't have to worry about reducing the possibilities of the user. I can just set defaults and nice defaults, and the user can customize everything later. Some nice higher order stuff. There is a directive to add directives. This directive has itself conflict detection, and the directive I will add will have conflict detection. Let me give you an example. Basically, I want to add a directive to set the awesomeness level of my application. What it will do, it will just change in the registry of my application the awesomeness level attribute. There are two things to do when I add a directive. I have a callback, which is what is the configuration code itself, and I have a discriminator, which is basically if I call two directives with the same discriminator, they are conflicting. I just have a function that takes my configuration object and the argument. I set the callback and the discriminator, and I call config.action to add this configuration action. I then call config.addDirective to add this new directive, and once I import this Pyramid awesomeness module, I can just call config.setAwesomeness level to any level like 42. This means that an application, a library writer can add directives that are exactly like the built-in directives. It's possible to add hooks, and it's really useful when writing libraries. So to summarize this first part, I have a system to delegate configuration and to check that everything is sound, that there's no conflicts, and I didn't make a mistake while configuring. It's a great way to organize configuration of an application because I can put parts of the app in different modules and import it all in the end. And it's also a great way to make libraries because actually there's not much difference between a modular arrays application and a library. It's just that the library is extracted from the application and there is name and documentation, but it's the same techniques. Just to give you some comparison with Django, when I want to include a library, I have to configure every hook by hand. I have a list of things in my settings.py. For example, if I want to use Django browser ID, which does the same thing as Pyramid Persona, I have to add it to my installed apps. Then I have to add an authentication backend to the authentication backend. I have to add something to the template context processors. I have to add some stuff to my urls.py. I have to handle all the entry points of the hook by hand. So there won't be any conflicts because I'm the one writing the configuration file and adding every stuff by hand, but it can be tedious. So just for the comparison, Pyramid enabled you to just write one line and import everything without having to handle it all. So what can I do with all this? I'm going to give you some tips, some examples taken from Pyramid extensions, existing Pyramid extensions, and how to use the configuration to improve application writing. So first of all, for applications, it's possible to use the add directive to simplify the configuration. Let's suppose I have a very simple application where I have only one view for each route. And I'm writing it like this. And it's quite tedious because for each view I have to put 2 lines and I have to define a temporary route with a domain name. So it's possible with add directive to simplify this. I'm just going to add a directive. What it does is it calls these 2 lines. It generates some route name. It calls these 2 lines, add route and add view. And I add my directive, and then I can just call it like that. I add simple view with the view and the path for each one. And because I use a directive, I have conflict detection on this. I can't define 2 views with the same path. At the commit, at the creation of the application, it will crash. It will tell me. But we can make it even nicer if we use a decorator. So let's see how these decorators are implemented. They are quite simple, in fact. It's just about attaching something to the view so that it's detected by scan. The Venusian library, which is a part of it's part of the Pyramid project, not a Pyramid code base, is used to do that. So my decorator is just take an argument which is a path, and when it's called, so when it's called with the view, it just Venusian.attach the view and self.register, which is a configuration code. It will just call add simple view when I do the config.scan. And with these few lines, I have exactly the Flask configuration, the same configuration as the Flask application, just simple decorators with the root. Another nice thing to do with the configuration when I have my own little application is to add stuff to the request. For example, I really like that when I get request.user, it returns me the user object for the current user. But when I say the user object, it's the one I define in my model. It's not some pre-existing one. So it's quite simple. Just a matter of defining the function that takes a request and returns the user object. Here is an example from my code. It uses SQL Alchemy, just does the database query. And I call the directive or add request method with get user and the name of the attribute of the method that I want it to be. But that's not all, because I also tell it to verify. First of all, this implies that this will be a property and not a method. So it's request.user, not a method call, but an attribute. And verify make it so that the function will only be called once by request. Once a function is called, the property is replaced by the result of the attribute. So if I call it multiple times in the same request, every subsequent call request.user is just the user object and not some property or function call. And that's kind of nice. Pyramid has a concept of events, which is just at some point of the application an event is thrown, and you can add subscriber to execute some code at that point. There's events just before the rendering of the template is done, on your request, on your response, when the application is created, and when the context is found with traversal is done, but I'm not going to spend time on that. So this is used, for example, with the before render. I can consider the event as a dict, and if I put things in this dict, they will be available as global variables in my templates. This is extremely useful to add some helpers to my templates. What I do is I have a helper module, and I add it to my template like that. That was a quick example of what you can change in your application. A lot of things can be changed and can be customized in very deep ways. You can customize the way URLs are generated. You can customize how view responses are handled so that you don't have to return a view. You don't have to return a response object at the end of the view, but you can return everything and register an adapter to treat it in some special way. You can change how requests are mapped to views, so that's something very deep in the web framework. You can change sessions, you can change authentication, renders. Nearly everything can be changed. So now, libraries. How can we use the config to make nice libraries or extensions? The examples are taken from real live applications. Real live libraries, existing extensions. So again, the before render events enable me to inject some variables into the templates for the user of the library to use. Here's in my Pyramid persona, I introduce the JavaScript the user need to introduce directly into the template, so he can use it right there. It's possible to use add directive to add an entry point. For example, pyramid layout extends pyramid and adds two new concepts of layouts and panels. And it introduced the new directives add layout and add panel. And the pretty interesting thing is once you have included it, there's no difference between the built-in directives and the directives that were added. No difference between add view and add panel. To the user, it's seamless. So it's possible to extend the framework and turn it into something much more complex with much more functionality without it being just some knob on a knob. It's pretty nice and seamless. One nice thing, just an example of what can be done, is it's possible to add a view predicate. So just to explain, a view predicate is when I add a view and I say root path equal hello and request method equal post, these two last things are view predicates. They are used to decide whether or not a view should be used to answer a request. It's possible to add some, to change the way requests are matched, or just to do some extra work. Pyramid layout, again, enables someone to write config.addView, root name equals thing, and layout equals some layout. And what it does is, it will call this. It's much nicer to add this in the view definition, or even in the decorator just above the view, than to call this inside the view. So it's enabled to add to the, not to the syntax itself, but really to the core part of the framework to customize it. What else do I have? I have twins, which are wrappers around pyramid request handling. I can do stuff before, I can do stuff after, and I can get exceptions. These are, for example, used in Pyramid debug toolbar or Pyramid xlog. Debug toolbar is a nice, provides, among other things, a nice exception view when there is an exception in the application, and xlog logs exceptions. And both of these use twins to get exception from the application and do stuff on the way out of the request. It's also possible to do some stuff on the way in. they're pretty much like WSGI middlewares, but they're inside Pyramid, so I had access to all the configuration of the Pyramid application. One task that I found hard and no direct answer, but I finally found it, is how to handle global stuff. Because when you write an application or an extension, you need to have somewhere to put things like database connections that should persist between requests. I found two answers, and people think for each one, people saying it was the wrong. I've got people telling me I had to write in the registry, which is some kind of central registry of the application. But some people told me the registry is unbound for that, and I should use settings. The settings dict, which is the setting of the application. Other people told me the setting dict is for settings, not global objects. So both are available. I don't think there is a problem with putting in the wrong one. Maybe someone will be able to tell me which is the one true way. To finish, an example of a real big framework which is implemented on the top of Pyramid. It is Cornice, which is a framework to build JSON APIs. It provides, well, let's just show how it's done before. To use it, I create a service object. I give it a name, I give it a path and a description, that is some documentation. And I can define this view for the method, the HTTP method I want. I can define a view for the get method that will return something for this user, for example. I can define a post that will do something else. And the Cornice framework will give me a validation on the request. If the request is not a valid JSON, it won't crash. It will return the right error message. Error message for the other methods. If I call delete method, it will say no method not implemented. It gives me Sphinx documentation, so it will generate a nice documentation for the whole API, other type of validation, a lot of nice stuff. And this is implemented on the top of Pyramid, and it's implemented quite simply, because when I look at it, it doesn't look like Pyramid, but it's just more or less two simple steps. First of all, they've added config.art add Cornice service to this directive. You just have to call it with a service object, and it will add all the view, all the defined view to the right place in the Pyramid configuration. And then they added a Venusian callback. So the Venusian callback was what was used in the decorators. This time it's not a decorator; it's added to the user to the service object when you create it. This meant that the service object somewhere in your model will be detected by the config.scan. So to create my API with Cornice, I just define all this. I create a configurator I call config.scan, and that's it. And this is possible because of Persona's extension system. So, just as a conclusion, Pyramid is really customizable. You can do a lot of different stuff with it and bend it to the way you want to do it. If you don't already use it, if you use Django, just keep this in a corner of your mind. If one day what you want to do doesn't fit the Django way, remember that this is available, this is very customizable, and this is quite simple to use. A few of your links, if you want to get this later. My presentation is mostly based on the documentation. And the slides are available online.
Do you think we got a problem?
Oh, sorry. And the slides are available online. Thank you. Sorry.
Quick question. When you register, when you subscribe an event inside the library, how can you override it?
To keep it easy now for manually, it should work fine.
Okay, thanks. How can you override an event? That's a good question.
There are queues from what I know.
Yes, if you subscribe some code to an event, it will be added to some list. But I believe there is a way to access that list of register event and to unregister some.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
Well, first, thanks for the talk, and I'd like to ask whether there are some techniques to register applications twice or 3 times, because I've seen some of the techniques assume that the application is a singleton, and is it possible, for example, to pass some configuration to include me so I can register the application extension once with some prefix, some config, and the other time with another config?
Okay, I'm not sure I understood your question, but Pyramid doesn't assume the application is a singleton. It's just an update. Sorry.
Sorry, I mean not application, but extension. So is it possible to register the extension twice with different settings?
Oh, that's an interesting question. No, I think it wouldn't be possible to register an application. I think it wouldn't be possible to register an extension multiple times, except if it only does roots. The roots, because they have different prefix, won't conflict, but any other directive will conflict. One way to work around that would be to split it into two things. All the directives that would conflict if included multiple times in some module, and all the roots in some other.
Thank you for your talk. Just one quick question. Now it's clear to me that Pyramid gives offers a good solution for how can I say? Okay, choosing between Django or Pyramid is now clear to me, depending on what you want to do. I mean, it seems that Django does a lot of things in your back, and it's sometimes great and useful. And you can customize a lot of things with Pyramid. Just one quick question. If you develop the same kind of thing, I mean, just defining views, roots and views in the both framework, have you an idea about the performances between the two frameworks?
I don't have some proper benchmark, but from what I understand, Pyramid, for the Pyramid developers, speed matters, and they try to make it so that basic things, the request routing and all this is quite fast. I don't have a number, but I think Pyramid is supposed to be faster than Django. They make it so that it is.
Well, actually, just to answer that question, there's a nice design document from Chris McDonough, the author of Pyramid, defending Pyramid, where he argues for all these different design decisions, and one of them is the configuration. So Pyramid does all this work up front, like conflict resolution, detection, and all that, and that when the request comes in, it's actually very, very fast. So it's much faster because it doesn't use any regular expressions, for instance. So.
Anyone other? Okay, that was it. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Allora, now we have a break. Well,